Welcome back to the UIA Trusted Partners Podcast. On today's episode, I have a returning guest. In fact, I have one of the earliest episode guests on today's program. It's Steve Schmidt, elder law attorney, at Orr Law Group. Steve, how are we doing today?
Doing good. Glad to be back.
Hey, I'm glad to have you back in the seat because lots changed. We were kind of talking a little bit off air here. Back in the original recording, there was no video. So to give a little video description here, this table was where the camera is at, and we would sit across from each other like this. So it felt a little bit more of a long distance talk, we'll put it that way. But no, happy to have you in the seat. Now, for the listeners who maybe didn't catch episode 1, can you give us a quick overview of what you do, how long you've been doing it, and what got you into it?
Do estate planning. I've done a lot of estate planning over about 30 years now.
Wow, congratulations.
Long time. And I'm not ready to retire yet. And do a lot of elder law or Medicaid planning. And that it's a little bit less, not as long. It's a newer field.
Sure.
I've been doing some of it for about 20 years, but I've really done a lot of it over the last about 7 or 8 years, just done a lot of Medicaid planning.
Wow, love that. And how long? And you've kind of touched on how long you've been serving the Omaha area, but I guess one of our first kind of questions here for you is long-term care. This is kind of the focus I wanted to touch on today because it's a very important topic, and it's one that I feel kind of gets pushed until the very last possible chance they can do with it. So I am very curious, when is the appropriate time or the quote-unquote right time to have that conversation, let alone get a plan in place?
Well, the best time is about 3 years before you go into assisted living.
Okay.
Now, nobody knows when that is. And
sure.
So I've had clients below the age of 65 actually do it because there was some minor health thing that could go major.
Sure.
Maybe it's Parkinson's or early dementia or something like that. Most of the time, the rules change a little bit at age 65. Most of the time, I'm not talking to them till they're at least 65. Mm-hmm. And for my healthy clients, if they're like 75 and healthy, they don't want to think about it.
Right.
Once we get to about the age of 75, this is something that could happen, and so then it's a really good time to start thinking about it, even if we're really healthy.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is life happens. You can be perfectly healthy day 1, and then day 2, you trip and fall down some stairs. Has nothing to do with your health, though. So, it is very important to have these things in place and have these conversations. Now, what do you find is one of the more difficult aspects of having this conversation with people either getting up there in age or, potential children of those people, bringing them into a conversation and trying to evolve that? And I'm kind of curious, why do you feel like so many people push it off?
A lot of people just don't want to think about that.
Sure.
Like I said, I've done estate planning for 30 years, and a lot of times people don't want to think about dying.
Right.
The same thing with Medicaid planning is they don't want to think about, I may not be in my home as long as, forever.
Sure.
I may have to go into assisted living or memory care or nursing home. They don't want to think about that. And so, and a lot of times the kids don't, maybe the kids try and bring it up. A lot of times the kids don't bring it up. But regardless, a lot of times they just don't really have a conversation. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times my clients in their 70s and 80s, if life is going good for them, they don't even want to think about going into long-term care because, oh my goodness, that is so expensive. It's just going to destroy my finances.
Yeah, and I imagine that's probably one of the major pushbacks you get from that is, hey, I'm losing freedom, or hey, my money's tight as it is already, kind of deal. And I am kind of curious, how do you kind of circumnavigate or just help accommodate some of those pushbacks and alleviate some of those for the clients? Yeah.
Well, the important thing is get the right people in the conversation. So sometimes there's a lot of kids and they maybe all want to know what's going on.
Sure.
But usually the first conversation is maybe with 1 or 2 or 3 of the kids. And sometimes the parents are in the conversation. Now, if we're doing it in the proactive way, where we don't have to worry about long-term care for at least a couple more years, maybe 5 or 10 years, I like to have mom and dad in the conversation.
Sure.
But if we're in the crisis mode, and a lot of my clients right now are in crisis mode, meaning somebody has to go into long-term care.
Sure.
Then a lot of times I'm just meeting with the kids and that's it. But it's having the right people in conversation is the most important thing.
Yeah, and I'm very curious because this probably does come up a lot in your dynamic sibling and squabbles, and I'm sure it happens a lot. How do you kind of help maybe put them at ease, or maybe kind of alleviate some of this squabble tension that's going to happen? Because obviously they're stressed out about what's happening to their parents. So normally it just gets a big ball of emotion. Obviously you have a lot of years in this field. I'm kind of curious if you picked up some tricks to kind of just quell that to where people can more receive your knowledge instead of just panicking at the first word they hear.
Yeah. Again, the important thing is having the right people in the conversation. Sure. So the first thing is, I want to know, who does mom and dad trust?
Yeah.
So usually there's one child they trust to make financial decisions, which this is more financial, but it's also definitely on the health side too. So I want to know, who does mom and dad trust on the financial and on the healthcare side? And start the conversation with the one that mom and dad trust first. And once we kind of get some of the groundwork laid down, then if they want to, we can bring in all the other kids if they want to at some point.
I like that. And I think, as you're kind of alluding to that and kind of talking about that, I was picturing my own family in my head and just kind of thinking, I'm like, yeah, my brother would probably be the financial decision one. I would probably be the healthcare make sure they're okay one. It's kind of interesting to think about that, especially I'm only 30s. My parents aren't quite at that point yet, but they are approaching. They will be there at some point here. Well, the next probably 5 to 10 years. I won't out my parents' ages here, but I at least know a trusted professional to have that conversation with, and that's a great starting point. Again, we're sitting down with Steve Schmidt, elder law attorney at Orr Law Group, and talking about some long-term health care. Now, I am very curious. What do you think is one of the more difficult aspects of having the conversation with people to get long-term health care? Or is it more of a emotional part of things that you have to quell? Or is there really a hurdle that you always have to kind of jump over?
A lot of people just don't want to move out of their house. And so a lot of people stay in the house longer than they probably should.
Right.
And sometimes the kids figure that out. Sometimes the kids aren't really paying attention. Sometimes it's like a trusted financial advisor or some other professional.
Yeah.
But a lot of times people want to stay in their house as long as they can. And so sometimes they end up staying there longer than they probably should.
Yeah, and especially when they have good options available and they can plan responsibly for it. Now, one of the things that you had sent me over some information about long-term healthcare, because I'm obviously not very super well versed in this. That's why I'm talking to the professional. I kind of caught some key things on there, and I wanted to pick your brain on these. What are some of these key informations or key things that families maybe should have prepared when they come to talk to you and start to have this conversation, or maybe start this whole process?
Well, we're obviously looking for some basic financial information.
Sure.
Do you own a house? Do you have an IRA or some type of 401k? Do you have some life insurance? What kind of assets do you have? And most of the time, people do have a will. We want to take a look at, okay, what did your estate plan look like when you set that up? So just some basic financial information and document information.
Perfect. And then let's say, worst case scenario, I don't have anything in place. Never had a will. Don't have even a power assigned underneath me. I forget, is it power of attorney?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't have any of that in place right now. And I'm kind of getting to that point where it's not quite crisis mode, but I can see the writings on the wall. What do you tell me?
Definitely need to get those in place. And that's really where we start, unless it's really a crisis mode. But we still need to do that really quickly is, okay, let's make sure we get the right person or sometimes it's not a child, sometimes it's like a bank or something like that, but let's get the right person in there to make those decisions, and let's get those documents in place.
I love it. And again, sooner rather than later, people, because Murphy rides shotgun. It's an old broadcast saying, and it goes in life everywhere you go. If you don't know that law, it's Murphy's Law. Go look that up. That's your educational piece today. Now, another important conversation to have, and we kind of touched on this in the beginning of things, is Medicaid and VA planning. This is something that you also incorporate, and I didn't want to gloss past any of this. What are some of the major concerns that seniors might have or maybe face when they're trying to plan out Medicaid or maybe their assisted living situation?
So Medicaid and VA, it's important not to just kind of guess and do those things on your own, because that can really mess things up. Sometimes people are like, oh, I'm just going to give my house to my kids, or going to put my kids' names on the house, or something like that. And that can create more problems than it actually fixes. So yeah, with both of those, there are some very specific rules. And so you want to talk to somebody that understands those rules. So like for veterans, if you're a veteran, it's really good to work with somebody who knows some of those rules, because it used to be like 10 years ago, we could do both Medicaid planning and VA planning kind of together.
Really?
And now we end up doing more one versus the other. but we may not know which direction we're going until we actually sit down and look at both of them. So yeah, both of them have some rules about giving away assets. And
Sure.
of course, the other risk when you give away assets is you could create some liability potentially for, let's say, one of your kids goes through a divorce or gets sued, get a car accident or something like
Sure.
that. So you got to be really careful on how you do those things. Make sure you work with a professional.
Yeah, and that's really good things to kind of point out, because I think, here, especially in Nebraska, I always joke that we're a handshake state anyway, that everybody's just kind of goodwill about each other until they're not. And I think that's very important to think about, because I think a lot of parents and a lot of elderly try to go, oh, I'm just going to write their name on the deed to the house, hand it down, it'll stay in the generations. That's not always going to be the case. So definitely have that conversation, because what are some of those outcomes? Like if they don't have that in conversation with you and they just say, all right, Billy gets the house and I die a week later. What are some of the troubles they could run into if they were trying that Medicaid and they started planning into that and they started that process and then now everything's just tied up?
Yeah, I've had a situation not too long ago where they had put one of the kids' name on the house, and then another child actually ended up moving in the house, and then we were trying to kind of reverse some things, and it just made it a whole lot more complicated because now Medicaid is looking at what are you guys doing here with putting the house there and that type of thing. And so Medicaid planning, one of my basic rules is keep it as simple as possible. And so, yeah, there's some things we can do, but if we do that, it's just really going to slow down the process. So keep it simple, make sure we protect mom and dad. Those are the big things. The kids may end up getting more money, but that is not the primary objective at all. It's to protect mom and dad.
Yeah, that's the thing that you can't even see in the headlights yet. That's way down the road. You're hanging a left after a certain point, but literally what's in front of you is what does matter, and that is going to be having these plans in place, making sure everything goes smoothly and simple is effective. Jokingly enough, I had a stepdad who was in the military, and he taught me the KISS method very early, which for those of you out there just means keep it simple, stupid, which I took to heart because unfortunately it was to my own demise because I was being stupid and I was trying to overcomplicate things. But funny enough, that is kind of where I keep that philosophy to heart, because the more you try to complicate things, the more you try to be smart about things and you don't quite know exactly what you're doing, the worse off you end up. I've never seen anybody go, oh yeah, I kind of just finagled the system and I've worked out okay. I don't think anybody's ever really said that and walked away okay. But that's why we have the trusted professionals like yourself, Steve. Now, how do you reassure your clients while they're facing their fears so they can kind of be rational and really take your help where they're not trying to avoid it or just looking for an out or just maybe overwhelmed by what you're telling them, especially when we're talking about the Medicaid situations where they could potentially be going into assisted living as well. They might lose restrictions. They might have a little bit tighter budget. How do you help them overcome those fears?
Yeah. Well, the important thing is that we're going to be with them through that process. So, technically what we're doing is we're helping plan the process and kind of get it going. But we're not, we're going to be there through the process. And so we want to make sure that once it's done, and a lot of times the kids get more involved toward the end of the process because they're just in a better position to make sure things keep moving.
Right.
But we're going to be there as a resource for them and make sure that when it's done, they're going to be in as good a shape as possible.
I love that. And I think, again, just going back to having a good conversation with trusted professionals. Now, what would you say is one of the best pieces of advice that you can give our viewers facing this conversation and they're just trying to get that in front of their parents right now?
Yeah, just have the conversation, find a time that's maybe an easy time to talk about it and say, okay, particularly if you don't have any idea who mom and dad's power of attorney is, that's a good place to start. It used to be, 50 years ago or 40 years ago, nobody used to tell their kids what their finances were.
Right.
Today, that's generally not a good idea because we live so much longer. Generally, the kids need to get involved at some point in understanding what the finances are. Yeah,
and that's a really good point. It's so funny to think about that. Yeah, maybe less than 50 years ago even, that people were very buttoned up about their finances. It was almost taboo to openly discuss finances, even with family, which I find kind of odd in retrospect, but in today's era, like you said, we live completely different. We live longer. There's a lot more things to our disposal. There's a lot better medication to our disposal as well. That's a very good point to bring out, and I really hope that viewers can really cling on to some of these bite-sized pieces of info that we're getting here. But I am very curious, the biggest challenge in your industry, how do you overcome it, either for the business or for your clients, and what is that challenge?
Biggest challenge is probably just working with DHHS. The planning we do sometimes goes through just fine, and sometimes they'll find something maybe that's really minute, and they'll really kind of dwell on that, and so we got to really go back and forth with them.
Sure.
But it can be intimidating for the individual, but it can also be intimidating just for anybody that's trying to work with them. So that's probably the biggest challenge, is keeping it simple and making sure that it keeps moving forward, and just making sure it gets done.
Yeah, I like that. Now, what is something you'd like listeners to know more about, either when it comes to long-term care, Medicaid, or VA planning, or maybe just about retirement in general?
So it's great advice to make sure you have IRA type money, but at some point in time, if there's too much there, then we need to start paring back on that a little bit. And it's great to save money, but even if you do everything just really well, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to have any issues down the road. And so, buy long-term care insurance. I'm a big believer in that, but know for a fact, long-term care insurance may not cover everything. So
it's true.
So you need to kind of keep on top of your finances through the process. And again, at some point in time, when the time is right, bring the kids in on that process too.
Yeah, I like that. And I think it is one of those that people need to keep a pulse on what they're doing, and especially in those later ends of life. I think we all kind of get the tunnel vision, so to speak. It's like, well, we're towards the end. Let's enjoy what we've got left. We don't want to think about all the bad, but it's something that you have that, hour-long conversation, however long that really takes to plan out and get everything in place, and then it's done. You get back to enjoying life, and you don't have to worry about that sort of thing anymore, which I think is great.
Right.
And I think that is just the power of talking to somebody like yourself, trusted professional Steve Schmidt, elder law attorney at Orr Law Group. Now, Steve, did we miss anything that we wanted to touch on for the folks at home?
You just had some questions there as far as on some personal things. So what am I excited about for this next year?
Those are next. I just wanted to make sure we covered all the business.
I think we're good on that. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. We're on to the personal ones then, as you're excited for them too. What's something here in 2025 you're excited for?
So one thing I'm really excited about is we've got a March Madness social coming up for Center Sphere. So I love basketball. I've liked basketball my whole life. And several years ago, we started a joint social, and we did a College World Series. Nothing against baseball. I just love basketball. So I'm really excited that this is coming up. Yeah,
I'm excited too. Again, we'll try to get this episode up before this is going on. So people, if you are interested, what are the rules behind this? Do people need to be in Center Sphere to partake? Is this an open event?
It's an open event, so anybody can come to it, yeah. So
all right, and we'll have this little graphic. Don't worry, you at home probably won't be able to see this, but I'll have Matt put it up on the screen for all of you to see right now, and so you can get all of the details about this awesome event. So very excited for that as well. By the time people are listening to this, though, we'll have celebrated the 1 year of the podcast party. So awesome party. It was great. That's tomorrow for spoilers. But no, we're very excited for this, and I actually just met the gentleman, Tom Hazel, with Anchor Roofing the other day. So very, very nice. Yeah, he's very excited about this event too. So happy for that. Looking forward to that one as well. Now, one that I'm curious if anything has changed. I don't remember if I asked this in the beginning episode. I don't think I quite did. But I love having the perspective of I'm coming in from out of town and I ask you, hey, what are my top things I should go see? What do you consider your Mount Rushmore that I should go be checking out?
Well, I like the outdoors. So
right
there's a lot of really cool places in Omaha that you can go spend some time outdoors. And it really wasn't until COVID that I spent more time doing this. But Hitchcock is over in Iowa, actually. But Hitchcock's a great place to go hiking. And then in Omaha itself, we have like Standing Bear Lake, Cunningham Lake, and there's some great things you can do there to go hiking and just kind of hang out in nature.
Yeah, some beautiful areas over there, and especially I'm forgetting the name of the area. They just did a bunch of revitalization down there a year ago now. Gene Leahy, down in that region too. Very beautiful outdoor region as well. So I'm with you. I love getting outdoors, especially now that we're having some nice weather again. Oh, my soul needed some sunshine. We were pretty cold there for a little bit. But my final burning question here for you. is something I love to get a business perspective on, plus a little dash of personality in there. Because I always like to ask, what is something here in Omaha that you wish more people knew about, or maybe just supported more?
Yeah. For me, one of the big things is just the veterans. So there's a 50-mile march that's been happening here for a couple of years. And I want to really encourage people to support that and learn more about it. And then also there was a Ron Hernandez thing. I don't know if you saw that on the news, but he was a veteran that helped a lot of homeless veterans. And then he was in a situation where he was potentially going to lose his house. He's not that old, but he's got a really critical illness. He'll probably pass away. No. And he wanted to make sure the house is there for his family. And actually, it was not so much him, it was the people around him said, okay, really want to help you guys out. So, yeah, just the veterans. We've got some veterans in here that sometimes don't get taken as well care of as well as they should have. So I want to make sure that, promote that.
100% agree, because 50 Mile March, friends of the show, they'll be at the podcast party here. Spoilers, they'll be already at the podcast party. But no, it's fun. I already have a little plan up to meet up with Bree and Jay to talk a little bit more about in episode 2 and a little bit more about how I might be able to be involved with the
That'd be good.
50 Mile March. So some good fun ideas in place. I won't spoil anything yet because nothing's in solid stone just yet, but very, very good call out. I love supporting veterans in our region because there are so many great organizations that do help out with that. I just feel like they never get enough love. We need a bigger spotlight.
Yeah, absolutely.
All righty, Steve. Well, that does wrap up about the time that I had planned out for you today. Was there anything else that you wanted to leave the folks off with home before we let you go today?
Nope. Just get some planning done and don't put it off until it's in crisis mode.
Yeah, I like that. Get your planning done early. That way you can enjoy all of your life to the fullest without having to worry what's going to happen after you're gone. That's why you trust the professionals and the trusted professionals here on the Trusted Partners podcast. Steve Schmidt, elder law attorney over at Orr Law Group. Steve, I want to thank you one more time for coming on out and joining today's show.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Of course. And thank you to the listeners. Of course, we're always going to have more right here on the UIA Trusted Partners podcast.